The views expressed by our guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply any endorsement of them or any entity that they represent. Views and opinions expressed by the Progressive Liberal Party members are those of the members. They do not necessarily reflect the views of the Progressive Liberal Party, nor any of its officials, and neither its guest hosts. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact the Office of the Secretary General.
Welcome to another exciting episode of Coffee Break. I am your guest host, Apryl Sands. Welcome. We have a special guest with us at the table today, none other than the Progressive Liberal Party Deputy Leader and Shadow Minister of Finance, Chester Cooper. How are you today?
I'm well. Thanks.
Good.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here.
I've been watching your show, and congratulations. The ratings are pretty high.
I know, I'm shocked. I'm really humbled by that. Thank you so much. So you've been in frontline politics for just about 3 years. That would be correct, right?
Mm-hmm.
People see you as a new and fresh face to the party. You're the only one right now who hasn't been a part of the Christie administration. How do you feel about that? And do you feel, in fact, do you feel like the new guy on the block?
It's been a baptism by fire, if we can call it that. A few months after being elected, I had to face the Hurricane Irma in Ragged Island. Then we had an election in October for the deputy leadership race. I feel like I've been around for a long time. I'm enjoying it. The people of Exuma have given me this opportunity. The great people of the Progressive Liberal Party have given me a chance to be the deputy leader of the party. And we got straight to work to help to reposition our party for victory in 2022 or whenever the election is called. So it's been nonstop. It's been exciting. And certainly it's been very enjoyable to have the opportunity to represent Exuma as well as to represent the Progressive Liberal Party at this level.
So I understand that, though that makes perfect sense. You've put in the work and you don't feel like you've put in so much work. You don't really feel like you're new at this at all. However, people have taken on that stance with you and have almost it's I would say, I mean, I can't speak for you, but it's almost like a compliment to be awarded this position of a new face. Does that resonate with you? Do you feel like that's something that's important to the Progressive Liberal Party? Where do you think that's coming from? When I'm sure you've heard that before.
I take that as a compliment. And, you know, politics for me is a national service. And I've been in business for 15 years, having been CEO of a major group of companies for quite some time. So coming into politics, there isn't much that I hadn't seen before. I have a lot of experience in corporate politics. This is different because there's an element of greater social responsibility. Obviously, there are more constituents than there would be in the business world, but government is a big business, and being shadow for finance gives me an opportunity really to learn government, but in opposition. So I look at it as an opportunity. I see it as a compliment. I'm new to frontline politics, but I've never been a member of any other political party. I thought what I would do is to set a framework for other young people like me who can establish themselves in business, who can live the Bahamian dream, if you will, through empowerment, subscribing to the PLP's philosophy. So I consider it a great honor at this stage in my career to be able to offer public service and give it my full attention.
Has it been taskful trying to balance both worlds? Because yes, you are the CEO, as many know, of BAF, and then yet, yes, frontline politics as well. You're serving in that arena as well. Has that been tedious for you? And even being a family man as well.
Fortunately, I have a great team in the business. The way we structured it, we put in place a succession plan some 3.5 years ago. I wasn't expecting to be in opposition. God had other plans, and therefore, we found ourselves here. So I need not be involved with the day-to-day operation of the business. So I operate at a high level of strategy and coach and mentor almost on a full-time basis, take care of the strategic direction of the business. But by and large, I'm a full-time politician, if you will, focusing on the needs of Exumas and Ragged Island, focusing on the needs of the Progressive Liberal Party, and moving full steam ahead towards the general election.
So obviously, you probably can imagine we have so much to tackle, and I want to just jump into it. In a recent interview, the executive director for the World Health Organization, Mike Ryan, noted that lockdown should be avoided as much as possible. He claims it's punishing to communities. However, locally, of course, you've seen and we've seen how we've continued to use lockdown since the spring, even in contrary to other countries who have kind of done away with lockdowns to curb the spread of COVID. I can't help but think, though, how much these lockdowns have impacted us, whether it be socially, economically, physically, even morally. In your opinion, what have these lockdowns done for us as a community and as a people?
I think the studies and the reports of the WHO that lockdowns don't work for long term was quite interesting, because our leader had been saying that for quite some time. The real reason for lockdowns ought to be for us to help to reposition what we're doing in terms of the economy, in terms of legislation, in terms of our social programs, to be able to cater to the needs of the Bahamian people. However, we find ourselves in lockdown after lockdown after lockdown, and it's quite distressing because it appears that we are living in a constant state of emergency. And we have said over and over that it was an opportunity for the Minister of Administration really to put in place enabling legislation so that we can have an appreciation for how to live after the state of emergency passes. So these lockdowns have been brutal. This crisis has been incredibly brutal. It's a threefold crisis, really. It's the economic crisis, it's the health crisis, and the crisis of failed leadership by this F&M administration. So we have suffered as a country tremendously, not just economically, but socially. There's still too much pain and suffering continuing in the country. Unemployment is up, morbidity is up, mortality is up, the level of poverty is up, the frustration level of lockdown after lockdown without any scientific measure and basis, the unpredictability of it has made matters worse. The leader liked to say, it didn't have to be this bad. So I borrowed that line today as I reflect on your question of the myriad of lockdowns that seem not to come to an end. Certainly, we do not separate the health crisis from the economic crisis. We recognize that COVID is real. We recognize that we have to bring COVID in line, in check, especially in our capital city of New Providence. We have 75% of the population here in Nassau. We cannot advance the economy unless we have the epicenter of Nassau as the COVID hotspot under control. So we understand that sometimes there has to be some short-term mechanisms to slow down the spread of COVID. However, the constant long-term flip-flopping, zigzagging decisions of this administration has caused more pain than it needs to.
And of course, I don't want to take away the importance of the health crisis that we're in. However, I do want to utilize the opportunity of you being here as the Shadow Minister of Finance to ask you how devastating has these lockdowns been economically for us, and if there's even a figure, how deep are we in a hole right now because of the lockdowns?
I think when we look at the COVID crisis as a whole, we see a very significant impact on the economy. Overall, it would be an understatement if I said I was not concerned about the state of the fiscal affairs, the state of the economy of the country. At the moment, it's my estimation that there is in excess of 50% unemployment. The IMF has projected that we are going to have an economic decline in the region of 15%. When we travel on Bay Street or Robinson Road or Nassau Street or over the hill, we see countless numbers of businesses shuttered at the moment. These businesses employ people. People rely on their salaries to eat and to pay their rents. So there's a trickling impact. This goes beyond just the macro picture like we talk about in Parliament, but it's really impacting the individual economies of families. 80% of families have experienced a loss of a job in the country. And that is significant. It says all that there needs to be said about the crisis and the impact on the overall economy.
Well, I know this is probably a really tough question. Will we know, and just to put things into perspective, will we know how detrimental this whole thing has been anytime soon? I mean, we're kind of going through it right now. So I'm wondering, just so that we can understand, is there a figure that there is to kind of understand how bad this has been? How deep are we right now? Or not really?
This is going to be long, and the decline of the economy is going to be deep. I mentioned before, I believe it's 15 to 20% in the measurement of the economy. We're going to see a decline in terms of the growth or negative growth, as the case might be. We see no end in sight at the moment. Tourism is our largest industry. Very few tourists are coming to our shores. We saw Sandals Emerald Bay in Exuma recently delayed their opening from the beginning of November to the beginning of February in 2021. Sandals is the largest employer on the island of Exuma. This will trickle in a significant way to persons who rely on Sandals for jobs, for tours, for restaurants. There's a significant direct and indirect impact. So if we now look at the same scenario of Bahama or Atlantis as it relates to New Providence, we see a similar scenario because the health crisis is still very much in play. We really don't know how long this is going to last. And I think that's the troubling aspect of the crisis. And this is why at the beginning in April, when we laid out our first economic mitigation plan, we advised the government to bulk up on cash, make sure that you have enough for the long haul. And in the event that the crisis is shorter, you can always pay some back. But we advise go hard, go early, bulk up on cash, put in place some significant, meaningful changes in terms of how you operate by cutting some expenses, but focusing heavily on social programs to ensure that we can ride this out in good form. Suffice to say, they did not take our recommendations. They have not implemented many of them. They have not released their own economic plan 8 months in. And we are very concerned as to whether there's a coherent set of strategies that they're rolling out, or whether they're simply managing this by the seat of their pants. And this is alarming.
Like most countries during this time, why have we not been able to see an increased financial assistance? We see there are checks in place for unemployed, but even for places like London and even the US, a majority of everyone is getting financial assistance because we're in peculiar times. Is there a reason why we're not seeing that, and should we have by now?
Well, my mother always used to say, save something for the rainy day. There have been a lot of rainy days, obviously. but the government is not prepared adequately for any crisis of any magnitude. We saw a lot of borrowing with very little to show. We saw mismanagement of the economy. Overall, we saw a departure from the National Development Plan. There's been really no focus on priorities. And when we talk about the National Development Planning process, it talks about prioritizing how we're going to grow and develop our economy and how we're going to deal with crisis, how we're going to deal with social issues. I am not surprised that we find the government programs running out of money. I mentioned earlier, we recommended that they bulk up on cash, and they didn't do it. Quite frankly, they laughed. They thought it was a big joke. Now the Bahamian people are crying because the reality of it is that we have to cut back on programs. Bahamas Air is running out of money. They can't buy fuel. They can't pay their staff. Unemployment benefits, you mentioned, is being reduced from 200 to 100. Many people who are in need can't access that benefit. A lady called me the other day. She has 6 people in her house, and she went to one of the feeding network sites, and they gave her a $20 voucher, $20 for 6 people for a week. It's really heartbreaking. The stories are endless. People are being evicted left, right, and center across our country. The government's rental assistance program was dead on arrival. And I can go on and on and on. It was really a lack of planning, a lack of an economic plan. We still don't see the government's economic plan. The lack of a real credible plan for even the COVID health crisis itself. And of course, the abandonment of the National Development Plan really put the government on their hind legs, trying to be reactive rather than proactive. So the reality of where we find ourselves today is because of the lack of government's planning and prioritizing, quite frankly.
But even in spite of the lack of planning, are we really, I want to ask this in the most proper way, but is it really impossible? I would think that this would be the main priority right now, despite not knowing what we're going to do with the lockdowns, despite not knowing what we're going to do in this health crisis, at least providing persons with some type of financial assistance. I'm just thinking that should be a priority.
Yeah.
Is it really impossible?
Bahamians are catching eternal hell right now because of the lack of that support. We know studies have shown, the Red Cross studies in particular have shown, if you provide cash support to people in need, they will spend that money at convenience stores, at their neighborhood stores. It will trickle down. Those neighborhood stores will continue to be able to employ people. We would be able to keep the domestic economy going. It takes some planning. It takes some strategizing. It takes a bit of vision. You have to plan out for the future. And regrettably, this government has not done that.
In other words, it's not impossible.
It's not impossible
If
at all.
they really wanted to, they could find the money.
Well, they find money for many other things.
Yeah.
They're building $20 million
Yes.
worth of
The
sidewalks. They brought in a new jet that's going to cost the country $110,000 per month.
Yeah.
I'd like for them to speak to that, because in the middle of a COVID crisis, I would think that the basic needs of food and shelter would be the priority, taking care of the indigent, the poor, the elderly, and making sure that Bahamians live in dignity.
That's the thing. I understand we might not know what to do. These are real strange times we're in. I understand leadership could make some bad decisions. But ultimately, I mean, even the President of the United States understands that even for him, a campaigning trick has been to promote a stimulus check for persons in the country. I mean, it's almost like even if it was, I would just think it's just basic knowledge to at least provide the people with help right now, and whether it was sincere or not. And then even like you would have already mentioned, the other things that have now been in place are almost considered a slap in the face. The sidewalks and the other implementations of things that can't really help us at this current moment. So I totally agree with.
Candidly, the Bahamas is not positioned to provide the type of support of countries like Canada and some of the larger countries of the world, because we really rely on earning our money from tourism and external means. We can't print our own money, but this is an opportunity for us to look and learn from this crisis. I think it was Churchill who said, "Don't let a good crisis go to waste." We've had hurricanes after hurricane. We've had Irma, we've had Dorian, and the question is really whether we are putting in place lessons learned for managing those crises. Now we have a pandemic. Nobody expected it. Nobody could plan for it really. But the reality of it is that I trust that we are learning from these crises. We will be better off when we see another hurricane come. We will know what to do. We will have a plan. We will be able to anticipate that we will have to provide for the poor, the indigent, the elderly, and the suffering, because that's what a government should do. A government should look out for its people, and people should have a basic expectation that their social needs and a safety net will be there for them during a time of crisis.
So obviously, countries usually see an annual increase with value-added tax, especially depending on the country's fiscal debt. Do you predict we will see higher value-added tax implemented from this administration in our next budget?
Well, it's difficult to predict what this government is going to do under the circumstance. What I would say is that the circumstances at the moment are quite dire. There will need to be some adjustments, some fiscal adjustments. There will have to be some cost cutting. It will be up to the government and its leaders and their policymakers to determine what direction they're going to go. It is my view that the economy and the country and the people of the Bahamas cannot support another tax hike. We cannot afford an increase in VAT at this time. The government would have increased VAT by 60% during this term. And now we find ourselves with our backs against the wall with very little headroom because they've borrowed consistently and excessively, and there's very little to show for it. So this is the predicament we find ourselves in. And they would likely say that, okay, it's all because of Dorian, or it's all because of COVID, but they must give an account because we are not satisfied with the explanations. Even before Dorian, we have raised the alarm as to what we consider to be poor management of the economy. Today, we're still concerned about Abaco and Grand Bahama because of the impact of Dorian. There's been very little accountability. In Grand Bahama, they still get salt water from their taps. In parts of Grand Bahama, there's still not restored electricity. In Ragged Island, as a result of Hurricane Irma, there's still no accountability on funds spent, funds received, and funds spent. The people of Ragged Island received very little support from the government. All of the administrative buildings are still in disrepair since 2017. The school is underway. But by and large, Ragged Islanders remain neglected as a result. The people of Abaco now have a similar cry. So the demands and the needs are significant. And because there's been such a poor execution of reconstruction plans, poor prioritizing, an abandonment of the National Development Plan, very little proactivity, we find ourselves in the predicament that we're in.
I'm glad you segued into Dorian as well, because I had a question in regard to that. The U.S. aid had noted that they had spent or given around roughly $33 million in government assistance to the Bahamas after Dorian. And of course, that's only one chunk of one chunk of proposed assistance, monetary assistance that we had received, we know that there are a ton of persons who noted that they would be helping, a ton of agencies, celebrities. Of course, just because you make a commitment doesn't mean you have to keep it. However, we were told we only received 7 million. And anybody who was doing mental math could see it was definitely beyond 7 million that they were seeing, tabloid after tabloid, news headline after news headline, that persons were trying to commit to help the Bahamas. How do we hold the government accountable to the figure that was given? And then of what we were hearing just on a global aspect, how do we know if this is the real figure? And how do we get to hold them accountable to that, essentially?
That's just it. They must explain. We've asked over and repeatedly for a full accounting. We wanted to know details of all of the funds that were collected. Mm-hmm. I found it curious that a minister of the government very early in the Dorian crisis, when there were an abundance of pledges and donations announced, that they said that it's because of the confidence that the world has in the minister's administration that they're offering all of this support. And then a few months later, they came back and they said, well, there were a lot of pledges, but we didn't collect. Mm-hmm. So that really was a stunning indictment on this administration. There had been a level of expectation that there would be more support for reconstruction. Mm-hmm. There was a level of expectation that by now the public infrastructure would have been back up to speed in Abaco and Grand Bahama, and that is not the case. People consistently complain that they hadn't seen enough, fast enough, by way of support from the government. Quite frankly, the government has botched the reconstruction exercise. They've botched the whole administration of the aftermath of Hurricane Dorian, everything from counting bodies that would have gone into a trailer to the burial process, but more recently, the lack of progress in terms of the reconstruction. It's really stunning that at this point, more than a year after Hurricane Dorian, people are still complaining about lack of support. We are grateful and thankful to the many NGOs, the many international bodies who pledged. There were a lot of the charities on the ground in Abaco and Grand Bahama, specifically in East Grand Bahama. Rotary was very active. Mm-hmm. The government, by and large, was not very visible. But thank goodness to the graces of God that we were able to have some friends in the world who came to our aid.
Absolutely. So, of course, we covered a lot in this conversation, but my very last question to you is specifically on the cannabis industry. Does the PLP see the legislation of the cannabis industry as a popular issue or economic empower for all Bahamians? Should we be taking a deeper look into this industry, as has been suggested by so many advocacy groups?
Absolutely. The leader's gone on record that this is something that we will advance. And we will advance it very quickly, not just looking at cannabis for its economic impact, but also looking at the entire social economic framework, making sure it's properly regulated. We are committed also to expunging records of persons who would have been found with small quantities of marijuana. We think this is important to allow persons to get back into the mainstream with a clean police record to be able to earn money for their families. This is just a small part of what I consider to be an exciting platform for the Progressive Liberal Party. The leader has charged me to work on that platform, that blueprint for the future. And we're not just looking at a 5-year term, we're looking at a longer term benchmark of where we would want to go into the future. So we're looking at all aspects of the economy, all aspects of our social framework, everything we can do to help to grow and develop our economy and our country. We're leaving no stone unturned. This is an opportunity for reform. This is an opportunity for transformation. This is an opportunity for moving our country forward. And that is what we are committed to doing over the next 5 years in government.
Can we come out of this pandemic without hurting any more than we already are? And of course, that question pertains to economically and even socially.
I hope so. I reflected on Winston Churchill's quote of not letting a crisis go to waste. This has been an incredible opportunity for us to reassess where we are, to hit the reset button, to examine all of our industries, to examine our social programs, so that if ever we come to a situation like this one, and I hope that we never do, but if we ever return to a place of crisis, we have a plan by which we must govern. The National Development Plan must be the key plank as to how we ensure that we do not find ourselves ill-prepared. So in the National Development Planning process, we must look not just at the economy, but we must look at governance, we must look at our people, and we must ensure that there are appropriate safety nets to ensure that the least amongst us are protected. That is really a part of the deep philosophy and core values of the Progressive Liberal Party for empowerment and for upliftment and for not leaving anyone behind. So even though we've made significant progress in terms of our legacy, we are the party that ensure that no one is left behind. We look out for the oppressed, we look out for the suffering, and we put in place institutions and programs like we've done over the past 50 years to ensure that we are well positioned for the future. And that is what we will continue to do.
So thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to our audience for tuning in. You can join us here every Sunday, same time, same place, on the show Coffee Break with your guest host, me, Apryl Sands.